David Thompson gripped the steering wheel tighter as the first drops of rain hit his windshield. The sky had been threatening all afternoon, but he thought he could make it back to the city before the storm hit. His sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom hummed quietly along the empty highway, the kind of road that stretched for miles through farmland without a single gas station or rest stop in sight. He glanced at his Rolex. The board meeting tomorrow morning was crucial, and he needed to review the quarterly reports tonight. As the CEO of Thompson Construction, one of the largest building companies in the state, David was used to tight schedules and high pressure. But right now, all he wanted was to get home to his penthouse apartment and a hot cup of coffee. The rain started coming down harder, drumming against the roof of his luxury car. David turned on the windshield wipers and slowed down slightly. The road was getting slippery, and even though his car had all the latest safety features, he wasn't taking any chances. That's when he heard it, a strange clicking sound coming from under the hood. At first, he thought it might be something hitting the car from outside, maybe a small branch or some debris blown by the wind. But the clicking got louder and more frequent. David frowned and turned down the radio to listen more carefully. Click, click, click. The sound was definitely coming from the engine. "Come on, not now," he muttered under his breath. This car was barely 6 months old and had cost him more than most people's houses. It was supposed to be the most reliable vehicle money could buy. The clicking turned into a grinding noise, and suddenly David felt the car losing power. The engine was still running, but something was clearly wrong. He pressed the gas pedal, but the car barely responded. The speedometer needle dropped from 60 to 40, then to 30 miles per hour. David pulled over to the shoulder of the road, just as the engine made one final, awful sound and died completely. The sudden silence was almost as unsettling as the noise had been. He turned the key, but nothing happened. Not even a click. The dashboard lights flickered once and went dark. "Perfect," he said, hitting the steering wheel with his palm. "Just perfect." He pulled out his phone to call for help, but his heart sank when he saw the screen. No signal, not even one bar. He held the phone up toward the window, moving it around, trying to catch even the weakest connection. Nothing. David sat in his dead car, watching the rain pour down harder. The storm was getting worse by the minute. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by rumbling thunder. He could barely see 50 feet ahead through the rain-soaked windshield. He tried the engine one more time, turning the key and pumping the gas pedal. The car made a weak whirring sound but wouldn't start. David wasn't a mechanic, but he knew enough about cars to realize this wasn't something he could fix with a quick restart. Looking around, he tried to remember how far he'd driven since the last town. It had to be at least 20 miles, maybe more. The nearest city was definitely too far to walk, especially in weather like this. But sitting here wasn't going to solve anything either. David opened the door and immediately regretted it. The rain was coming down so hard it felt like someone was dumping buckets of water on his head. His expensive suit was soaked within seconds. He jogged to the front of the car and popped the hood, hoping to see something obvious that he could fix. The engine bay looked complicated and intimidating. Wires, hoses, and metal parts everywhere. Steam was rising from somewhere near the middle, and David could smell something burning. He definitely didn't know enough to tackle this himself. He slammed the hood shut and stood there for a moment, rain dripping off his hair and running down his face. In his 20 years of running a successful business, David had faced plenty of challenges, but this felt different. He was completely helpless, stuck in the middle of nowhere with no way to call for help. A few cars had passed by since he'd pulled over, but they were all going too fast to stop. Their drivers probably just as eager as he'd been to get out of the storm. David tried waving at one car, but it barely slowed down before disappearing into the rain. He climbed back into his car, soaking wet and frustrated. The leather seats, which usually felt so comfortable, now seemed cold and unwelcoming. David sat there for a few minutes, trying to think of a plan. He could wait for the storm to pass and then start walking toward the nearest town. Or he could try to flag down another car, though that didn't seem very promising. Just as he was considering his options, David noticed something in his rearview mirror. A small figure was walking along the side of the road, coming from the direction he'd just traveled. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Who would be walking in weather like this? As the figure got closer, David realized it was a child, a young girl, probably no more than 12 years old, wearing what looked like oversized coveralls and carrying something heavy in her hands. She was walking slowly but steadily through the rain, seemingly unbothered by the storm. David rolled down his window as she approached his car. "Hey," he called out. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The girl looked up at him and smiled. Despite being completely soaked, she seemed remarkably calm and collected. "I think you're the one who needs help," she said, pointing toward the front of his car. "I heard your engine making trouble from way back there." David stared at her in surprise. "You heard my engine? From how far away?" "About a mile or so," she replied casually. "That grinding noise carries pretty far when everything else is quiet. Plus, I know what a healthy engine sounds like, and yours definitely isn't healthy." The girl walked closer to his car, and David could see that she was carrying a toolbox. It looked old and worn, with scratches and dents all over it, but it was clearly well used. The toolbox seemed almost too big for her small hands, but she carried it with confidence. "I'm Lily," she said, adjusting her grip on the toolbox. "I live on a farm about 2 miles back that way. I was heading home when I heard your car break down." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. This young girl was offering to help him with his car trouble? He looked around again at the empty highway, the pouring rain, and his dead luxury vehicle. The situation was already so bizarre that nothing would surprise him at this point. "I appreciate the offer," David said carefully. "But this is a very expensive, complicated car. I think I need to call a professional mechanic." Lily tilted her head and gave him a look that seemed much older than her years. "Well, you can try calling if you want, but I don't think you'll get much signal out here. And the nearest tow truck is probably an hour away, even if you could reach them." She set down her toolbox and wiped some rain from her face. "Look, I know I'm just a kid, but I've been fixing engines since I could hold a wrench. My dad taught me everything he knew, and he knew a lot. I promise I won't hurt your car any worse than it already is." David hesitated. Every logical part of his brain told him this was a bad idea. But he was stuck, wet, and running out of options. And there was something about this girl's confidence that made him think she might actually know what she was talking about. David stared at the young girl standing in the rain, her confidence both surprising and unsettling. Everything about this situation felt wrong. A 12-year-old offering to fix his $100,000 car? It sounded like the beginning of a very expensive mistake. "Listen, Lily," he said, trying to sound gentle but firm. "I really appreciate you wanting to help, but this isn't like fixing a lawnmower or a farm truck. This car has computers and sensors and all kinds of advanced technology. Even professional mechanics sometimes have trouble with these models." Lily shifted her toolbox to her other hand and gave him a patient smile. "Mr. Thompson, right? I saw your name on the side of those construction trucks that came through town last month." David nodded, surprised she knew who he was. "Well, Mr. Thompson, computers and sensors are just tools. They all work on the same basic principles, whether they're in a fancy car or a tractor. Electricity flows, circuits connect, and engines need air, fuel, and spark to run. The complicated part isn't understanding how they work. The complicated part is figuring out what went wrong when they stop working." She set her toolbox down on the wet pavement and looked directly at him. "I heard your engine making that grinding noise from way back there. Based on the sound and the way it died so suddenly, I'm pretty sure it's not a mechanical problem. It's electrical, probably something in the engine management system." David felt his eyebrows rise. "Engine management system?" "Yeah, the computer that controls fuel injection, ignition timing, all that stuff. When those systems fail, they usually make that clicking sound you heard right before everything shut down. The grinding noise was probably the starter trying to engage when the computer wasn't sending the right signals." David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He had no idea if what she was saying was correct, but it certainly sounded like she knew what she was talking about, and the symptoms she described matched exactly what he'd experienced. Lily must have seen the uncertainty on his face because she continued, "Look, I understand why you're hesitant. Most adults don't expect kids to know about this stuff. But my dad started teaching me about engines when I was 6 years old. He said understanding how things work is more important than understanding how much they cost." The rain was still pouring down, and David was getting soaked again. He glanced up and down the empty highway. No other cars had passed by in the last 10 minutes. His phone still showed no signal. He was running out of options, and sitting here arguing wasn't going to get his car fixed. "Okay," he said finally, "but I'm watching everything you do. If anything looks dangerous or if you're going to damage something, I'm stopping you immediately." Lily nodded and picked up her toolbox. "That's fair. But can we pop the hood? I'm already soaked, and standing out here talking isn't going to fix your car." David reached inside and pulled the hood release. Lily walked to the front of the car and lifted the hood, propping it open with the hood rod. She leaned over the engine bay and David joined her, both of them getting drenched by the rain running off the hood. "Hand me that flashlight from your glove compartment," Lily said without looking up. "How did you know I had a flashlight?" "Expensive cars always have emergency kits. Basic road safety." David retrieved the flashlight and handed it to her. Lily clicked it on and began examining the engine systematically, starting from one side and working her way across. She moved with purpose, checking connections, looking at wires, and occasionally touching different components. "There," she said after about 5 minutes, pointing the flashlight beam at a black box near the center of the engine. "See that module? That's your engine control unit. And see those wires coming out of it?" David squinted through the rain and nodded. "Two of those wires are corroded where they connect to the harness. The connection is loose, so the computer isn't getting consistent power. When the connection finally failed completely, your engine shut down to protect itself." She moved the flashlight to show him another area. "And over here, this relay is probably burned out. When electrical systems start failing, they usually take other components with them." David stared at the parts she was indicating. To him, they just looked like more pieces of the mechanical puzzle under his hood, but Lily was pointing them out like she could read them as easily as a book. "How can you tell all that just by looking?" he asked. Lily glanced at him, rainwater dripping from her hair. "You see that slight discoloration around those wire connections? That's corrosion, and this relay here should be cool to the touch, but it's still warm, even though your engine has been off for 15 minutes. That means it was working too hard before it failed." She opened her toolbox and began pulling out tools. David was amazed by how organized everything was. Every wrench, screwdriver, and gadget had its own place, and despite the toolbox looking old and worn, all the tools were clean and well-maintained. "My dad taught me that taking care of your tools is just as important as knowing how to use them," Lily said, noticing David's expression. "He used to say that a good mechanic treats their tools like a surgeon treats their instruments." "Your dad sounds like a smart man. What does he do for work?" Lily's hands paused for just a moment as she selected a small wrench. "He taught me everything I know about fixing things. He was the best teacher anyone could ask for." David noticed she didn't really answer his question, but before he could ask again, Lily was back to work on his engine. "I'm going to disconnect these corroded wires and clean the connections," she explained as she worked. "Then I'll test the relay to see if it's really burned out. If it is, I think I have a compatible one in my toolbox." "You carry spare relays?" "I carry lots of spare parts. You never know what might break down around here. Farm equipment, trucks, generators. People are always needing something fixed, and the nearest auto parts store is 40 miles away." David watched as Lily carefully removed the corroded wires. Her movements were precise and confident, nothing like what he would expect from a child. She handled the tools like she'd been using them for years. "There's your problem," she said, holding up one of the wire connections. "See how green and crusty this is? That's copper corrosion. It builds up over time and eventually stops electricity from flowing properly." She pulled a small wire brush from her toolbox and began carefully cleaning the connection. "This car is only about 6 months old, right? This kind of corrosion usually takes longer to develop unless the car was exposed to salt water or really humid conditions." "I bought it in February," David confirmed. "How did you know?" "The corrosion pattern. Plus, some of the other components still look brand new." Lily continued working as she talked. "Did you drive through any big storms recently? Or maybe park near the ocean?" David thought about it. "I drove to a construction site near the coast about 2 months ago. There was some flooding in the area. That would do it. Salt water and electrical systems don't mix well. Even if you didn't drive through standing water, the salt in the air can cause problems." She finished cleaning the connections and moved on to testing the relay. Using a small device from her toolbox, she checked the component and nodded. "Yep, this relay is dead. But I've got one that should work." She rummaged through a compartment in her toolbox and pulled out a small plastic component that looked identical to the burned-out one. David couldn't help but shake his head in amazement. "You just happen to carry the exact part I need." Lily grinned at him through the rain. "Like I said, people around here are always needing something fixed." Lily carefully installed the new relay, making sure it clicked firmly into place. The rain continued to pour down on both of them, but she seemed completely focused on her work, as if the weather didn't exist. Now for the tricky part, she said, picking up a small roll of electrical tape from her toolbox. I need to rebuild this connection so it won't corrode again. The original design has a weak spot where moisture can get in. David watched as she began wrapping the cleaned wire connections with what looked like a special kind of tape. Her movements were methodical and precise, like she'd done this repair 100 times before. Is that regular electrical tape? He asked. Nope. This is marine-grade sealing tape. It's designed to keep salt water out of electrical connections on boats. After what happened to your car near the coast, regular tape would just be asking for trouble again in a few months. She worked slowly, building up layers of protection around each connection. My neighbor Jake learned that lesson the hard way. He's got this old fishing boat, and he kept using regular tape to fix his electrical problems. Every few weeks, something else would stop working because salt got into the connections. So you fixed his boat too? Lily nodded, not looking up from her work. Jake's boat, Mrs. Patterson's tractor, the generator at the community center when it broke down during the summer festival. Word gets around in a small town when someone can fix things properly. David was starting to understand that this wasn't just a hobby for Lily. She was clearly the go-to person for mechanical problems in her community, but that raised even more questions. How had a 12-year-old become so skilled that adults trusted her with their expensive equipment? How long have you been doing this kind of work? He asked. Seriously? About 4 years now. But my dad started teaching me when I was really little. He used to let me hold flashlights for him when he worked on engines. Then he taught me how to identify different tools. By the time I was 8, I could take apart a carburetor and put it back together. She finished sealing the wire connections and moved on to another part of the engine. Dad always said that understanding how things work gives you confidence to tackle problems that seem impossible. He taught me that there's no such thing as magic when it comes to machines. Everything has a logical reason for working or not working. Your father sounds like an incredible teacher. What kind of work does he do? Again, Lily's hands paused for just a moment. He taught me that helping people is the most important thing you can do with your skills. He said that knowledge is only valuable if you use it to make other people's lives better. David noticed she had avoided his question again, but he didn't want to push too hard. There was clearly something about her father that she didn't want to discuss. Hand me that small screwdriver, Lily said, pointing to her toolbox. The one with the blue handle. David found the tool and passed it to her. As he did, he noticed something else in the toolbox that surprised him. Alongside all the modern tools were some pieces that looked much older. Vintage wrenches, a manual torque gauge, and what appeared to be a compass. Those are some interesting tools, he commented. Lily glanced at what he was looking at and smiled. Some of those belonged to my dad. He always said good tools last forever if you take care of them. That torque gauge is from the 1980s, but it's still more accurate than most of the digital ones you can buy today. She used the screwdriver to adjust something deep in the engine bay. Dad taught me that new isn't always better. Sometimes the old ways of doing things work just fine, especially when you understand the principles behind them. David was fascinated by her philosophy. In his business world, everyone was always chasing the latest technology, the newest software, the most advanced equipment. But here was this young girl who seemed to value understanding and craftsmanship over flashy innovations. There, Lily said, straightening up and wiping her hands on a rag. I think that should do it. The connections are sealed, the relay is replaced, and I've bypassed a couple of other weak points in the wiring harness. Bypassed? I rerouted some of the electrical pathways to avoid areas where corrosion might happen again. Think of it like taking a different route to work when you know there's going to be construction on your usual road. She closed her toolbox and stepped back from the engine. Want to try starting it? David hesitated. Part of him was afraid to hope that this would actually work. If it didn't, he'd be right back where he started, except now he'd also have to worry about whether Lily had accidentally made things worse. But looking at her confident expression, he realized he trusted her. Over the past hour, she had demonstrated more knowledge about his car's electrical system than he possessed about anything mechanical. Okay, he said, walking around to the driver's side. Here goes nothing. David slid into the wet driver's seat and turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine turned over once, twice, and suddenly roared to life. The dashboard lights came on, the radio started playing, and the air conditioning began humming. David stared at the gauges in disbelief. Everything looked completely normal. The engine was running smoothly. without any of the clicking or grinding noises from before. He got out of the car and found Lily closing the hood with a satisfied smile on her face. "I can't believe it," David said. "It's running perfectly. How did you do that?" "Like I said, it's not magic. It's just understanding how systems work and what can go wrong with them." Lily picked up her toolbox. "But you should probably get it to a proper shop when you get back to the city. I made some temporary fixes that should hold for a while, but you'll want to have someone do a complete electrical inspection." David reached for his wallet. "What do I owe you?" "Seriously, this repair probably saved me hundreds of dollars in towing fees alone." Lily shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I was just helping a neighbor, but I'm not your neighbor. And this was professional level work. Please let me pay you something." "Okay, how about this?" Lily said with a grin. "Next time Thompson Construction is hiring for summer jobs, maybe you could consider some of the kids from our town? A lot of them are good workers, but they don't always get opportunities to prove themselves." David was impressed by her response. Instead of asking for money for herself, she was thinking about helping her community. "That's a deal. But I still want to do something for you personally. This was incredible work." Lily adjusted her grip on her toolbox. "Really, Mr. Thompson? Seeing that engine start up again is payment enough. Dad always said that the best reward for fixing something is knowing it's working the way it's supposed to. You talk about your father a lot. I'd love to meet him sometime and thank him for raising such an amazing daughter." For the first time since they'd started talking, Lily's confident expression wavered. She looked down at her toolbox and David saw her touch something in one of the side pockets. "That's not really possible," she said quietly, "but I carry something with me that reminds me of his lessons every day. It helps me remember to always do my best work no matter how big or small the job is." David sensed there was a story behind her words, but before he could ask anything else, Lily was already walking away. "Drive safely, Mr. Thompson," she called over her shoulder. "And remember what I said about getting that electrical system checked out properly." David stood there watching her disappear into the rain, still amazed by everything that had just happened. A 12-year-old girl had just fixed his luxury car with skill that rivaled any professional mechanic he'd ever met. And she'd done it with tools that looked like they'd been passed down through generations. As he got back into his now working car, David couldn't stop thinking about the mystery surrounding Lily and her father. Who was this man who had taught her so much? And why did she seem so reluctant to talk about him directly? David had a feeling their paths would cross again. And next time he was determined to learn more about the remarkable teacher who had shaped this extraordinary young mechanic. David sat in his car for a moment watching Lily walk away through the rain. The engine was purring perfectly, and he still couldn't quite believe what had just happened. He turned on the heater to warm up and dry off, but his mind kept racing with questions about the remarkable girl who had just saved his evening. As he was about to pull back onto the highway, he noticed something glinting on the wet pavement where Lily had been working. David turned off the engine and stepped back out into the rain. There, partially hidden under a small puddle, was a laminated card. David picked it up and shook off the water. In the dim light from his car's headlights, he could see it was some kind of identification card. He walked closer to his car to get a better look, and what he saw made his blood run cold. It was a military ID card. The photo showed a man in his 30s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The name read Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, United States Army Corps of Engineers. But it was the stamp across the bottom that made David's heart sink. KIA, followed by a date from 2 years ago. David stared at the card in shock. KIA meant killed in action. This was Lily's father, and he had died serving his country. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way Lily talked about her father in the past tense, her reluctance to discuss him directly, the comment about carrying something that reminded her of his lessons, and most heartbreaking of all, her statement that meeting him wasn't really possible. David looked up and saw that Lily was now about 100 yards away, still walking steadily through the rain. He called out to her, but the storm was too loud. He jogged after her, his dress shoes slipping slightly on the wet pavement. "Lily, wait!" he called as he got closer. She turned around, surprised to see him running toward her. "Mr. Thompson, is everything okay? Is the car not working?" David held up the ID card. "You dropped this." Lily's face went pale when she saw what he was holding. She quickly set down her toolbox and reached for the card. but David could see her hands were shaking slightly. "I'm so sorry," David said gently, handing her the ID. "I didn't mean to pry, but I saw it on the ground and wanted to make sure you got it back." Lily took the card and held it carefully, protecting it from the rain with her other hand. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked like the 12-year-old girl she really was. Her confident, professional demeanor had disappeared, replaced by vulnerability and sadness. "This is why you learned so much about mechanics," David said softly. "Your father was an engineer." Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak for a moment. When she finally looked up at David, there were tears mixing with the raindrops on her face. "He taught me everything," she whispered. "Dad always said that understanding how things work was the most important skill anyone could have. He said that engineers solve problems, and the world always needs people who can solve problems." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He was in the Army Corps of Engineers?" "Yes. He specialized in infrastructure projects, building bridges, setting up power systems, making sure clean water got to places that needed it." Lily's voice got stronger as she talked about her father's work. "He used to tell me stories about helping rebuild communities after disasters, or creating solutions when other people said something was impossible. That's incredible work." "He must have helped a lot of people." Lily smiled through her tears. "He did. Dad always said that the best part of being an engineer wasn't building things. It was knowing that what you built would make life better for families you'd never even meet." David was quiet for a moment, processing everything. Then something clicked in his memory. "Rodriguez. Michael Rodriguez. I think I knew your father." Lily's eyes widened. "What?" "About 3 years ago, Thompson Construction was working on a flood relief project downstate. We were building temporary housing for families who had lost their homes. The Army Corps of Engineers was coordinating with civilian contractors to get infrastructure set up as quickly as possible." David's mind was racing as the memories came back. "There was this one engineer who went above and beyond to help us understand the electrical and plumbing specifications. He stayed late every night, making sure we had everything we needed to do the job right. He kept saying that these families had been through enough and they deserved better than just basic shelter." "That sounds like Dad," Lily said, wiping her eyes. "He never did anything halfway. Michael Rodriguez. I remember him now. He caught a mistake in our electrical plans that could have been dangerous. Probably saved lives by finding that error." David shook his head in amazement. "He was one of the most dedicated people I've ever worked with. Professional, brilliant, but also genuinely caring about the mission." Lily's face lit up with pride. "He used to come home and tell me about projects like that. He said working with good civilian contractors was one of his favorite parts of the job, because it meant everyone was focused on helping people instead of just completing paperwork." "What happened to him?" David asked gently. Lily's expression grew serious again. "He was deployed overseas on an emergency infrastructure mission. A natural disaster had wiped out the water treatment systems in several villages. Dad and his team were there to get clean water flowing again." She paused, looking down at the ID card in her hands. "There was an accident. A bridge they were working on collapsed during a storm." David felt his heart break for this brave girl who had lost such an incredible father. "I'm so sorry, Lily. The world lost a truly good man." Dad always carried this ID card in a special pocket of his toolkit. After the funeral, they gave me his tools and all his personal effects. Lily carefully slipped the ID card into a small pocket on the side of her toolbox. "I carry it with me whenever I'm working on something important. It reminds me to always do my best because you never know how much your work might matter to someone else." David watched as she secured the card. Now he understood why her toolbox was so well organized, why she approached every repair with such professionalism, and why she refused payment for her help. She was honoring her father's memory by living up to the standards he had taught her. "Lily, your father would be incredibly proud of you. What you did tonight, the way you helped a complete stranger without asking for anything in return, that's exactly the kind of person he was trying to raise." "I hope so," she said quietly. "Sometimes I worry that I'm not living up to what he taught me. There's still so much I don't know." "Are you kidding? You just diagnosed and repaired a complex electrical problem in a luxury car, in the middle of a thunderstorm, using tools and techniques that most professional mechanics don't even know about. Your father's lessons clearly stuck." Lily smiled at that. "He used to say that learning never stops. Even when you think you know everything about something, there's always a new way to look at the problem." David nodded. "Smart man. And he raised an amazing daughter. The rain was starting to lighten up slightly, but both of them were completely soaked. David realized they'd been standing there talking for almost 20 minutes, and Lily still had to walk home to her farm. "Can I give you a ride home?" David offered. "It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." Lily shook her head. "Thanks, but I like walking. It gives me time to think. Plus, the farm is just a couple miles through those fields, much shorter than following the roads." David wanted to argue, but he could see that Lily valued her independence, just like her father had raised her to be self-reliant and capable. "Well, then let me ask you something else," David said. "Do you have any plans for your education? Any thoughts about studying engineering?" Lily picked up her toolbox again. "I'd love to study engineering someday. But college is expensive, and my aunt who takes care of me now works 2 jobs just to keep the farm running." David smiled. "What if I told you that might not be as big a problem as you think?" Lily looked at David with curiosity mixed with caution. She'd learned to be skeptical when adults made big promises, especially strangers who barely knew her situation. "What do you mean?" she asked. David pulled out his business card and handed it to her. "Thompson Construction has a partnership with the State University's engineering program. Every year we sponsor scholarships for students who show exceptional promise in problem-solving and technical skills." Lily looked at the card, then back at David. "That's really nice, Mr. Thompson. But I'm sure there are lots of kids who deserve those scholarships more than me." "Are you serious?" David shook his head in disbelief. "Lily, you just performed a complex electrical repair that most certified mechanics couldn't handle. You diagnosed the problem faster than a computer diagnostic system would have, and you did it all while explaining every step like a seasoned professional." He gestured toward his car, which was still running perfectly. "More importantly, you refused payment and used your skills to help a stranger because that's what your father taught you. Those are exactly the qualities we look for in scholarship recipients." Lily shifted her toolbox to her other hand, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "I just fixed a car. It's not that big a deal." "It's not just about fixing the car," David said. "It's about how you approach the problem. You were methodical, confident, and professional. You used the right tools for the job. You explained your reasoning clearly, and you made sure the repair would last instead of just getting me back on the road temporarily." The rain had lightened to a gentle drizzle, but both of them were still soaked. David didn't seem to notice or care about his expensive suit being ruined. "Can I tell you something about your father?" David continued. "When I worked with him on that flood relief project, I watched him train young soldiers who were just starting their engineering careers. He had this way of teaching that made complex problems seem manageable." Lily's eyes brightened with interest. "One day we had a crisis with the electrical grid for the temporary housing. The power kept going out, and families with small children were spending nights in the dark. None of us civilian contractors could figure out what was wrong. The electrical inspector said everything looked fine on paper." David smiled at the memory. "Your father didn't just solve the problem. He gathered everyone around and walked us through his thinking process step by step. He showed us how to look beyond the obvious and consider factors that weren't in the manual. By the time he was done, 3 different people had learned something that made them better at their jobs." "That sounds like Dad," Lily said softly. "He always said that teaching someone else was the best way to make sure you really understood something yourself." "Exactly. And watching you work tonight, I saw the same approach. You didn't just fix my car. You taught me things about automotive electrical systems that I never knew. You made me understand what was wrong and why your solution would work." David paused, looking directly at Lily. "Your father's legacy isn't just the infrastructure he built or the lives he saved. It's also the way he taught people to think about problems, and you're carrying that legacy forward." Lily looked down at her toolbox, touching the pocket where she kept her father's ID card. "He used to say that knowledge is only valuable if you share it with other people." "Which is exactly why I want to help you get the education you deserve," David said. "But I'm thinking bigger than just a regular scholarship." "What do you mean?" David had been forming an idea ever since he realized who Lily's father was. "What if we created something more permanent? Something that would honor your father's memory while helping other young people who have his same passion for solving problems?" Lily tilted her head, curious but still cautious. "The Michael Rodriguez Memorial Engineering Scholarship," David said. "Not just for one student, but for multiple students every year. Kids who might not otherwise have the opportunity to pursue engineering education." Lily's eyes widened. You want to name a scholarship after my dad? I want to do more than that. Your father believed in practical, hands-on learning. Most engineering programs are heavy on theory but light on real-world problem-solving. What if we created a program that combined traditional engineering education with mentorship from working professionals? David was getting excited as the idea developed. Students wouldn't just learn from textbooks. They'd work on actual projects that help their communities. Infrastructure improvements, disaster relief support, environmental solutions. The kind of work your father was passionate about. That sounds amazing, Lily said. But David could hear the doubt in her voice. But something like that would cost a lot of money. Thompson Construction does well enough that we can afford to invest in the next generation of engineers, David replied. Besides, this isn't charity. It's good business. We need skilled engineers, and the best way to find them is to help train them. Lily was quiet for a moment, processing everything David had said. You really think I could be an engineer like my dad? Lily, I think you already are an engineer. You just don't have the formal education yet. But that's the easy part. You already have the most important qualities: curiosity, persistence, and a desire to help people. David gestured toward the road where his car sat running smoothly. What you did tonight wasn't just a repair. It was engineering in its purest form. You identified a problem, analyzed the symptoms, developed a solution, and implemented it successfully. Then you explained your process to someone else so they could learn from it. Dad always said that good engineers make complicated things seem simple, not the other way around. Your father was absolutely right. And you proved that tonight. Lily looked up at David with new hope in her eyes. If I said yes to this scholarship program, what would happen next? First, we'd make sure you have everything you need to finish high school strong. Tutoring if you need it. Advanced placement classes to prepare you for college-level engineering courses. Maybe some summer internships where you can get experience with different types of engineering projects. David pulled out his phone and showed her his calendar. I'm going to talk to the university's engineering department this week about setting up the scholarship program, but I'd like you to be involved in designing it. After all, you understand better than anyone what your father would have wanted. You really want my input on creating a scholarship program? Lily, you're the person who best understands your father's teaching philosophy. You're also the age of the students we want to help. Your perspective is essential. Lily hefted her toolbox and took a deep breath. Okay, I'd like to try. But I want to make sure that other kids from rural areas get a chance too. A lot of smart kids out here never get opportunities because they're too far from the big universities. David smiled. That's exactly the kind of thinking that tells me this program will work. Your father would be proud of you for looking out for other people. When do we start? How about next week? I'll drive out to your farm and we can sit down with your aunt to discuss the details. We'll want to make sure she's comfortable with everything. Lily nodded enthusiastically. She'll probably want to feed you dinner. That's what she does whenever someone helps our family. I'd be honored, David said. And Lily? Thank you. For what? For reminding me what really matters. I spend most of my time thinking about profit margins and construction schedules. But tonight, you showed me what it looks like to use your skills to genuinely help people. That's something I want to remember. As they said goodbye, David watched Lily walk away toward her family's farm. Her confident stride had returned, and she carried her father's toolbox with obvious pride. Driving home through the clearing storm, David realized this chance encounter had changed him just as much as it had changed Lily's future. He'd been reminded that the most valuable things in life weren't the ones you could buy, but the ones you could build, fix, and share with others. 3 months later, the first Michael Rodriguez Memorial Engineering Scholarship was awarded to 5 students, including Lily. But by then she was already working part-time at Thompson Construction, teaching other employees the problem-solving methods her father had taught her. And every tool in her kit still carried forward the legacy of a soldier who believed that knowledge, when shared with kindness, could change the world one repair at a time.